All right, well, let's get into this first story we're talking about today. Overwatch has got a new character on the docket.
Right.
Bridget.
It's Brigitte.
Overwatch has got a new character Overwatch has got a new character in the works. It's... Go ahead, Bo.
Brigitte. Yeah.
It looks like Bridget. Okay?
It does. And a lot of people... I saw like a bunch of Twitter responses when they found out it was pronounced Brigitte. They were like, wait, what? But yeah, I actually know someone named Brigitte. And so...
In real life?
When I saw it, yeah. So when I saw it, I instantly knew what it was.
Wow.
But everyone
I've
else...
never heard that name before. But okay, fair enough. It kind of makes sense.
Yeah, it does look like Bridget T, you know? But...
It's Bridget with an E, you know?
Yeah, it's German in root.
So. Brigitte. Oh, so okay. That makes sense.
Yeah. Which is cool. I mean, she's kind of like a tanky class, right? Like one of those. Yeah,
she's like a yeah, like you said, she
throws up some shields.
She's got a
shield.
Soaks
up some damage.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's good tank support from the looks of it. Mm-hmm. She's hit the public test realms already, so people have been playing with her, and
you can play with her now in the PTR, and she looks interesting. But that's not really what we're talking about. We're not talking about the fact that they're releasing a new character so much as we're talking about how similar she seems to be to another character in another game.
Paladins.
Known as Paladins, yeah.
Which, okay, so let's backtrack a little bit with this and kind of give some of the background with Overwatch versus Paladins, right? Because they both kind of launched around the same time.
Right, it was just the Paladins was a little bit after, I believe.
Well, Paladins is actually still in beta, so they're still releasing characters. They're still kind of like pushing the game out, but it's open, free-to-play beta, right? So you can go in, you can play. They basically have the League of Legends model, right? Where you start off with a select few, there's some characters in rotation, and then you can unlock more as you get in-game currency from playing through stuff.
Right.
And so after kind of Overwatch came out and then Paladins came out shortly after, they got a lot of slack of being like an Overwatch clone, right? And Stu Chisholm has said for a long time, he's one of the developers over at Hi-Rez, who's actually native to the Atlanta area.
Mm-hmm. Hi-Rez is a Georgia video game company.
Yeah, close by to our home. They've said from the start that they actually drew their information or their inspiration from Team Fortress 2.
So yeah, Overwatch was also heavily compared to Team Fortress 2, so it makes sense they're class-based first-person shooters.
Really, like, it even goes further back, right? So Paladins is more of like an adaptation of another high-res game called Global Agenda. That was one of the first games they put out, and it wasn't hugely popular. Not a whole lot of people played it, but it was very much like Team Fortress 2. And then they changed up a lot and kind of made it this more cartoony, World of Warcraft-esque feeling. All the levels are kind of that, earthy, kind of ancient feel, right? And so...
Yeah.
It's basically...
Lost Empire.
Right. So if you look back at Hi-Rez's history, it's not really a clone. It was more of parallel thought, right? Mm-hmm. They both were kind of thinking the same thing at the same time.
Right.
And they just happened to both come out around the same window.
And to be fair, they are very similar games.
Very similar.
I mean, even the whole, even the objectives of maps is pretty similar.
Right.
But...
I feel like a lot of the objective-based stuff that came to Paladins kind of was stolen from Overwatch. And that I will give them, I will say, yes, they both kind of came up with the same general idea around the same time, but, I mean, obviously the whole bomb...
Right, the whole
back and forth.
Taking the payload,
yeah.
and, right.
Basically the same game.
Right.
But, did they intentionally make... Paladins to copy Overwatch? No.
I don't think
away.
They did.
And you can definitely see it with the new direction they're going with the Battlegrounds, is like they're using this as a way for them to just kind of like experiment and try things out, and it's still in beta, so by the time it becomes a full-fledged game, it may not be even... It'll still be similar to Overwatch, but it may be much more.
Right.
And so...
Have a little more of its own feel to it, right?
Right. So they just wanted to make that clarification, and I felt like it's important to include that
And
in this discussion.
I don't think it is a straight ripoff of Overwatch, and it's definitely not a straight ripoff. There are legitimate straight ripoffs of Overwatch. In China, there's like games you can see that they literally copy the characters.
They copied the maps. Like there's a lot of the same animations. It's all basically mimicked and just put on a phone. Right.
It even looks the same. I mean, like even the like icons are like extremely similar. The layout is similar. The HUD is basically the same.
And what we're referencing is back in like October of last year. Blizzard decided they were going to sue an Overwatch ripoff called Heroes of Warfare, right? So that Blizzard China and NetEase, which is Overwatch's Chinese operator, did end up taking them to court. And because China has some very strict, like, copyright, intellectual property laws, like unfair competition laws, they were able to actually take it to court and get it seen by a judge. I don't know the verdict of it. I don't know where it ended up, but that does kind of seem hypocritical now that they have released Brigitte, who is almost identical to Paladin's Ashe.
I would say their complaints about Paladins is a little bit hypocritical now because Brigitte looks very similar to an already existing Paladin's character. Like you said,
she was one of the first.
Right, she was an original Paladin's character, yeah.
So Ashe, it's not just appearance because, I mean, you can see we've got Brigitte over here on the left. If you're watching the YouTube videos, you can see it, that we've got Brigitte on the left, we've got Ashe on the right. They both look very similar. They got a very similar character design in general, the way their chest pieces are kind of made, the way their leg armor and gauntlets and everything, just the whole like armor build in general kind of replicates that.
They both use a shield. They both are female semi-tanks, off-tank type.
That's where I was going next. Next is like on top of just looking similar, it's like their sole purpose is the same. They're both tanky support classes. They both have some kind of deployable shield. Brigitte calls it a barrier shield, whereas Ashe calls it a siege shield. And then even the next skill is a shield bash versus Ashe's shoulder bash. Right.
And
then rally versus assert dominance, which is basically the same thing. Like Brigitte moves faster, Ashe leaps forward and plants herself. So it's like, they're
pretty similar style characters.
Yeah.
And not just in like physical style, but also in
even their stance looks the same.
Yeah, they're pretty similar looking. I mean, don't get me wrong. So, but I think the biggest question we're asking is like, is this a bad thing necessarily for games to have these kind of cloning and this kind of copycatting that is going on a little bit, right? Especially when you think about the fact that Overwatch was first and Overwatch costs money where Paladins doesn't.
Right.
So is it kind of like a little bit, does it make you feel a little bit like, what the hell are you doing, Blizzard?
Right.
Copying a free-to-play game.
I mean, this is something that's been happening for years, right? This is not a new thing. It's whenever someone sees a hot new type of game come to the market, there's going to be somebody that's going to come and make something similar to it and just kind of roll with it, right? I mean, yeah, it goes back. I like some of the examples you pulled of like Rock Band to Guitar Hero. Very similar. Rock Band kind of expanded on it, and then Guitar Hero copied it right back.
Right. And I think that was a good example because they're like legitimately the same game. Like, I mean, it's...
But they didn't have this whole like, oh, we're going to take you to court thing about it, right? No one was.
I don't think Overwatch ever
shots at each other.
Overwatch never did take Hi-Rez to court.
I think it was more the community.
The community was more like, how dare you copy this game?
Right.
And I think that ultimately we can look at a more recent example of Fortnite kind of using the same game mode if you will, as PUBG's
Right.
entire premise.
Right.
And there was a lot of PUBG did threaten
Yeah.
legal action against Epic Games.
And that's something that we covered a long time ago.
Right.
And we both said this is ridiculous.
It's ridiculous.
It's a game mode. It's not an actual game. Fortnite is very different from PUBG. I mean,
And I think Paladins probably, I have not gotten a chance to play it myself, but I would hazard to guess that it plays differently than Overwatch does. Yes, maybe it's very similar in many ways,
right.
but just like Fortnite is very similar to PUBG in many ways, it's not the same game. Like, they
Right.
are different.
Paladins, you get a mount.
Right.
You have horses.
Right.
There's a
To
card-based
move faster.
system
Right.
that gives you power-ups and different advantages as you play through the game.
And it's also, it's is it wrong to make a game that's very similar to an extremely popular genre and game? I don't think
No.
it is. I think we can look at examples going even farther back. Saints Row to GTA. It's
Yep.
very similar. It's a big open world where you get to play a character that gets to do basically whatever they want in that world. I
Yep.
think, I don't know if anyone's familiar with Killer Instinct. It's an old fighting game,
Right.
but it was very similar to Mortal Kombat when it came out.
Which even then, Tekken,
Tekken, right? Any fighting game. I mean,
Street Fighter, they all were just copying each other, right? In the bare idea of what it was. You
Right.
need combos, you hit the people, you knock them down, they lose their health, you win.
And a little bit in the research I was doing for this, I found that Pong was actually a copy of another game called Table Tennis. So you can go back to the original first video game ever, and I think this is actually in some ways worse because it really is the same game. But it's the point
Right.
is that, or the point I'm trying to make is that when you've created a new genre, I think this happened when Overwatch came out. A lot of people were like, well, it's not a new genre because Team Fortress has already done it.
Right.
But it is expanding
The idea of Team
a
Fortress.
lot on Team Fortress. There was there was more game modes now, but it wasn't as fleshed out when it first came out. And
Right.
it was
That game's been evolving since its release.
right. So, the question is, when you have Doom come out as one of the original first-person shooters, not the first, but it was the first really popular one. Is it crazy to think that more people are going to make more and more games that have the same kind of system in place, mechanics and things of that nature? I don't think it is crazy. It's just how games evolve. You have to make it your own, but at the same time, I don't think there's anything wrong. I think, honestly, I think it's actually better for everybody because I think competition breeds ingenuity.
Right. People try to find ways to make what they're already doing
Better.
better.
You need to be able to stand apart, and I think
Right.
Brigitte is just ultimately an example of that, where
I think
Overwatch sees, okay, this character is successful and
Yeah.
they're good to play and it works in the game, and now we can kind of use that same idea in our game. Just like I'm sure Paladins took a lot of ideas from Overwatch. Is it crazy to think that Blizzard is going to go in the opposite direction and do the same thing a little bit? I don't think so.
No. I think one of the biggest things right now that's plaguing Overwatch is the toxicity in the community. And Paladin's community is a lot smaller in the current state of the game, right? It's still in beta. Most people are playing Overwatch and they say, okay, why would I go and get Paladins when I could just play Overwatch?
Probably invest time in it because it's free at least, but yeah, I agree with you.
Right, but then I was talking to someone today who said he doesn't play Overwatch anymore because it's just so toxic. You get on there and it's just people yelling at you over the voice chat, and you step away from it. Try out Paladins if you still want that same similar type of gameplay, because now it's gotten to the point where I think they accept each other more or less, because even Stu Chaston said I don't know how to feel about this. Would this be me, the pot calling the kettle black, or the kettle calling the pot black? He said he wasn't going to be able to sleep until he got a clear answer. And so I don't think he's really... IGN's trying to say he's throwing shade. I think he's more saying, I don't know how to feel about this, right? Is it something that he should get upset about, or no? Or
say
should they just kind of learn to coexist with each other and then kind of move forward?
Right. I mean, I would say that I can understand him wanting to throw a little bit of shade and be a little bit like, we got a bunch of shit when we first came out with this game. So it's only fair to throw a little bit back. With that said, I don't really remember like the development team from Blizzard being like, this game's a ripoff.
Right.
It was like you said, I think it was more of the community.
It was Hi-Rez getting attacked from Paladin loyalists who
from Overwatch loyalists.
That's what I meant. From Overwatch loyalists who felt like the game was encroaching on something that was new and they enjoyed.
Right.
But I don't know. I feel like they can coexist. I feel like there is a strong E-League now set in place for Paladins, just as there has now been established for Overwatch. I think it really is going to come down to personal preference, and there's going to be some people that will prefer going with Paladins over Overwatch, and there's going to be vice versa. Probably more people will prefer Overwatch, but I do think, it's got to feel pretty good to the guys over at Hi-Rez that here it is, Blizzard, one of the biggest companies, right? One of the biggest gaming companies, $7.9 billion in revenue last year, ripping off one of their character designs.
Yeah.
At the very least, like, you got to take a little bit of like, oh man, I think they like what we did there.
All right.
Right?
Yeah, I see. I see what you did there. Well,
it's kind of like back when classical music was a big thing, right? Back in like 1700s.
Baroque period.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
sure.
Whatever classical music period.
I was gonna say more romantic, but
okay, fair enough.
There was this like people would steal each other's motifs. Like some big composer would take this one little line out of someone's song and throw it into their new piece they composed. And back then, it wasn't seen as whoa, you're infringing on my IP. You're coming in and taking like my line, my motif, my little thing. It was seen as like a way to give respect to another composer. It's like if you wrote their line into your song, that was you saying like, this was a good line. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And so it was a way of giving respect. And I feel like depending on your perspective, you can kind of take that approach here. Again, it's like, here's Blizzard, a giant, taking a little something from the little
motif
guy.
From Paladins.
Right.
I would say this. I think the biggest thing for me and all of this whole idea is the market's big enough to support 2 of these games. The market's big enough probably to support maybe even 3. The thing is but that's also the answer, is the market will decide.
Right.
So if people will play one or the other, or people will play both, or people won't play any of them. But ultimately, it will come down to what people are willing to spend their hard-earned money on. And I think that's a lot more important. Like, if people are spending their money, people get to choose what they want to spend their money on. If they want to spend their money on Paladins, that's their right. And it's not an exact copycat. It's not a total ripoff. It's just a very similar game. And I think that ultimately is kind of, like we said, that's how it happens. Games are copied.
Right.
Or game styles are copied, I think. And that's the way that the game industry grows, and the way that ultimately
any industry
grows. And you can't just be copying, you can't just be expecting that there's only going to be one type of game, and that's the only type of game that you can make that way. Again, we don't all want to be playing Doom, right? People like to play Call of Duty and Halo and Destiny and everything else like that.
So any first-person shooter came from someone else's idea, right?
Ultimately, genres, come from somewhere else. So,
and I mean, I think that even the smaller side of it, like Paladins almost has like a cult following at this point. And it's cool because it's like you go on Twitch and Overwatch is at the top. And then you go down like 30 games down on the directory, there's Paladins.
Yeah.
And I feel like the community's closer because of that. There's less people, there's less toxicity because there's just less people. So, I don't know. It's up to you. Play the game you want to play. Don't throw shade at each other. Give them respect.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the way
Give
to
people
do it.
props for, being able to make a good game. And hopefully, again, I think the China example, that's a ripoff.
Blatant ripoff.
Paladins is, to be very generous, an homage,
Right.
maybe,
Well, it
It is an homage
was
to...
a case of parallel thought.
Right.
That has now turned into a back and forth.
And Overwatch and Paladins are both homages to Team Fortress. So
Right.